Todd McFarlane was an up-and-coming comic artist back in the early 80s. Like so many, he sent pack after pack of submissions to the mainstream comic companies, hoping for a chance. Most of these consisted of character pin-ups. Half resulted in no response, while the other half resulted in rejection letters. He persevered and eventually started getting work. In 1988, McFarlane joined writer David Michelin on Marvel's The Amazing Spider-Man, beginning with issue 298. His work there led to superstar status. Eventually, because of battles with editorial staff over content and his desire for more control over the characters he created, he, along with Eric Larson, created Image Comics. This allowed him and his fellow artists more control and ownership in the characters they created. Thus, it was in 1992, Spawn #1 sold 1.7 million copies, which is still a record for an independent comic book. Since that time, it has become the longest-running independent comic in existence. So, with this 28th anniversary approaching next month, we will be drawing and coloring Todd McFarlane's Spawn. Hello once again. Okay, we're going to be doing something a little different this time. We're going kind of old school, and I'm just going to be sketching this out from a drawing I have off to the side of Spawn. Again, I have this on time lapse, so we're trying to speed this up because, again, this was another lengthy drawing. Though I want to make a point here that I was really having a good time on this drawing, but what that led to was I would jump into this drawing and start working on it without realizing I was not recording. So we're going to have a couple of different spots here where I'm it kind of just jumps ahead and that's my fault because I did not record when I was going at it because I was jumping right into it. So basically, I said I laid the guidelines for this, and now I'm just kind of following in and laying out in this case, it's the lace marks because in this particular drawing, his face was kind of split. So he basically almost like used a shoestring to kind of stitch his face up. So it almost looked like a football. That's kind of the look that I was going for. Normally Spawn has his mask on, but not in this particular case. So I'm just kind of laying the lines in as I go. I'll kind of clean those up after I kind of get the main places down. Okay, so as I'm strengthening up some of the lines and adding some more details, we're about ready to get up to a point here where that one of those first big giant jumps that I made just because I was foolish enough not to hit record right there, as a matter of fact. And all I did basically was strengthen up the lines around the eyes and such, and that's what I'm continuing to do. For the most part, up to this point, I've been using just the pen tool to do these lines, starting out light as far as when I was doing the guidelines and such, but now as I'm adding a little more detail, I'm still using the pen tool, but I will, of course, I'm also using the eraser to erase some of the guidelines I originally had laid out. But eventually I will go to the curve tool for mainly exterior lines and certainly things where I want a nice strong line, as for example as I'm doing there. It makes for a nice strong line and none of the jags that I get when I'm sketching for the most part. So for exterior and especially for curves, the curve line is going to be used pretty extensively for some of this stuff. And again, it's just strengthening the lines that I had already have, even on the laces and such, where I'm strengthening those lines. And like I said, I will do a whole bunch of strengthening of lines and then erasing extra lines that I put in when I was sketching, as far as putting different, for placement purposes. Like I said, I'm just strengthening the lines around his mouth right now, and the top of his head, and also do the same thing for his cape. Spawn's all about the cape. He's got a cool cape. And that's all I'm doing now, just strengthening those lines with the curve tool. Again, I'll clean up the mess after the fact, like the back of his head there, where you, of course, would not be able to see because of the cape. Doing some more of the lacing again, where he stitched his face up. Another thing that I did on this particular drawing is I took a little bit of liberty when it comes time to coloring Spawn's face. I mean, I've seen it in other comics where his face is almost kind of a pale white look to it. That's not the route I went. I went with almost kind of a sickly yellow, almost pussy kind of color. I guess the best I could explain it. But we'll see that once we get into the color section of the drawing. Like I said, because right now I'm still just strengthening up lines. You're erasing again some of those extra lines that I put in there that I didn't need. And throwing in some extra. And see, that's another thing. Because normally, like I said, the extra ink lines I wouldn't be adding till after I lay down the color, which is pretty much what this is going to require of me. Is when it's time to do the coloring, I'm going to have to make another layer uh, to lay underneath my ink line, so I don't have to sit there and try to lay color in between all these lines I'm putting in. And again, like I said, we'll kind of get to that when we lay down the color part of it. But I'm just continue to go through, add lines, strengthen the lines that I want, get rid of the ones I don't. Uh, and that's what I say, and that's where again just the brush filling in the different lines that I want to add on there. And these are kind of I'm just kind of just throwing them on here. I mean, it's not like I've got a specific guideline telling me where to put them to a point. I'm just kind of putting them wherever I think it looks good. Okay, so now I'm kind of filling in the lines where the little skull pieces that hold on his cape, which I think are really cool, by the way. Uh, Filling those in and on his throat. So a lot of these areas are going to be inked in here, which actually is another thing. So when we get to the point where we're almost ready to color, you're going to see that, again, because I didn't record, some of the major ink areas are going to be already filled in. Uh, but basically, I'm laying the foundation for those ink lines that I'll end up filling in. Uh, so he's starting to look pretty good. Again, just keep strengthening lines, adding lines, removing lines. A lot of erasing going on here. But then back to the curve tool, just strengthening up the lines on his cape. Like I said, cape's kind of a big deal for Spawn, uh, and that's what we're making sure here that those lines are nicely blocked in. So I'll give you a kind of a preview. Our next lesson, we'll have done Spawn, we have done General Grievous, we'll have done Thor. I'm going to go ahead and show you how we can take those drawings that we've done and make full comic covers using them, which is actually a pretty quick lesson, and it's using Photoshop and Clip Studio. And it's pretty quick and actually looks really good when you do that. But let's not jump the gun here. We're still working on Spawn. Okay, let me talk a minute about the chain thing. The chain actually is a brush specifically set that I purchased for that, and the example that the man who created the brush gave me was Spawn. So the chain things doesn't require me having to ink in the individual chain. It was just a brush where I just run a line across and it drops the chain down. And wherever I put the brush, that's where the chain goes. I'll probably end up showing that in a future lesson. But we're getting ready to make another major jump here because, again, me and my recording issues. But we're going to jump ahead here and show where I laid in the major bit of inking that I was blocking out from before. So when it makes that jump, don't be too shocked. And as I said, okay, so all those areas that needed inked, I went ahead and had inked in. As far as coloring his face, we were talking about the ink lines on his face. What I ended up doing was making another layer of the ink lines and then erasing everything in that area where I had put his face, so I could use that as a color uh, background for the ink. So that's what I ended up doing. Like I said, I didn't use the pale white. I used a kind of a sickly looking yellow uh, color for his face. And now what I'm doing here is no different than what we've been doing in the past, which is using the airbrush to put in the shadows, and then also the highlights and any lights that we want to put in here. In this particular case, I'll do the same thing with the teeth. I started out because I had that pale yellow, kind of whitening them up just a bit, but then I followed in with the shading just to give them that kind of off dingy white. I mean, because it's not like Spawn has perfect teeth by any means. Uh, so we're kind of laying that in. Also said we'll add some yellow in, and before too long, we'll go ahead and add the green for his eyes. Because Spawn always seems to have them, you know, day glow green eyes that we'll be putting in. But I'm just adding in some color where it's needed, shading where it's needed, and also, like I said, some of that yellow that we were talking about before. Uh, a few times through in this section, I'll remove the ink lines, kind of show you what the shading kind of look like. Actually, it's kind of creepy when you look at it without the, yeah, just as I just did there, without the ink lines. Especially teeth-wise, he looks kind of nasty, but looks good with the ink going on here. Uh, One other thing that I probably should have mentioned in previous things when we're doing the separate layers, as I'm putting in the eye color, uh, by doing the separate layers with the ink lines and the color layers, you do tend to get some almost like a space in between different areas. So on this particular one, I'm going to be going in a lot after the fact and strengthening it up and filling in some of these spaces, mainly with black to fill in, because you'll see white gaps uh, along where the colors are separated, and that's part of the deal using the paint bucket where I selected areas to fill in. You're going to get those kind of gaps. I'll spend a bunch of time here, especially toward the end, of filling in the gaps that was left between those layers. But still working on Spawn's face here and getting ready to start doing his collar, his blue suit collar, before we start getting on to the cape. Again, there's another quick glimpse of him without his ink lines and the coloring we laid down for his face. So still at this point, still just playing around with his face, adding some ink lines and color wherever I feel like it's lacking some. See, you saw there, that's actually one of those deals where I put the color on the ink layer, which luckily I didn't get too far on that, where I end up having to do some massive backup. Of course, that's where your favorite undo tool comes in. That's where I'm adding some of that sickly yellow in there to kind of offshoot the kind of brownish look. There, another picture of him again without the ink lines. When you combine the ink lines with the color, it actually looks pretty good. So we're going to get ready to do his collar, and to do his collar, those ink lines that I've laid down in his collar, I'm probably going to have to get rid of those initially and then relay them back again after I filled in the color, because this was a situation where I, again, should have waited on those before I did that. But in the meantime, I'm just still laying, more ink lines on his face now that I've got the color in place. Okay, so now I'm laying the blue in on his collar and the part above his chest. And again, nothing different here. Still laying in the color, then following up with the shadows and the highlights on that particular piece of his costume. Okay, again, put the color on the ink layer instead of the color layer. No matter how often I do this, I still make that mistake at least once or twice in any drawing I'm doing. So relaying the shadow edges again, and then also relay the highlights. Okay. So again, that's where he's talking about those gaps. You see these little thin gaps amongst where the color is. I'm going in there with the ink and filling in those areas because I don't want that shining through. So I'll be doing, like I said, I'll be doing a lot of that as we get close to the finish of this drawing. And again, it's just part of the problem, or the part of the thing that happens when I use those separate layers of color ink and such. I do tend to get those little bit of gaps. It's not a big problem to clean up, but it is something I have to clean up. Okay, they're kind of working on his lips there a bit where I didn't get those colored in especially well, but I went back and captured those and still laying ink lines down. I'll be laying ink lines down here and there pretty much throughout the rest of the drawing as I move along. And of course, like I said, I lay an ink down and then I don't like it and take it off and lay it down again, trying something different until I find something that I like. So, time to start adding some of the red to the cape. Like I said, Spawn's cape's kind of a big deal because, with the way it flows and everything, it's almost an extension of the man. So in this case, like I said, again, just laid the basic red down, and then I'll go in and add the shadows and the highlights on the cape, just like I did for the neck on his costume. And that's what I'm doing here, is just laying in the shadows on his cape. And again, same thing with the cape. I'll have to go back in and fill in some of the gaps that get left by using the paint bucket and the selection. It'll leave some gaps that I need to fill in. See, like right there, I just went in, I had a gap that I needed to fill in, and I'll just go and fill that in. Same thing with down there, and also, I mean, wherever the little white is kind of showing through, I'll go in with the brush and deal with that, so it's not because of the the dark color and the white, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, so I don't want to have to deal with that. So I'll go in and clean that up. Like I said, I'll be spending actually a bit of time, though it won't look like a bit of time with time lapse going, but I spent some time going in and filling in those gaps so they weren't noticeable as the drawing is getting finished. Yep, filling in some more of those gaps. I'll end up adding some more shadow to strengthen the line between the cape and his face. So I don't know if you can hear that kind of cackling behind me. That's actually my daughters up front, upstairs with my wife. Uh, they're actually making the COVID mask, homemade masks, so they don't have to buy one. So that's what they're doing upstairs while I'm here playing on Spawn. So, still working on the cape, strengthening in the lines where gaps are at. Okay, so just about ready to go ahead and add a little more shading to his cape, especially on the far side of his face. I've gotten the one over there, as you can see now, I'm kind of laying that in, and then I'll end up adding the highlights into the cape, and then cleaning up again once any lines that get left. Hey, look, I laid the shading on the ink layer again. What a shock. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so we're going to actually lay the shading on the color layer this time. That always helps. Okay, putting the highlights in on its cape. And then we'll get ready pretty soon here after I clean up any lines I need to clean up to work on the skulls that are holding down the cape. See, as you can see, I got a few little gaps here I need to clean up. That actually needs to have some flush tone added to it. That's what I'm doing there. And then I'll go in and clean up those lines around the edge of the face and also darken in probably some more shading on the cape to kind of fill that in. Yep, just inking in that area, so some of the black. Okay, yep, just continue to clean up the areas that need to be cleaned up. But overall, he's looking pretty good. See, I had a good time working on this drawing. Like I said, number one, because it was a little more what I was kind of used to before, which is, find a picture I like and then just recreate it. Used to, of course, normally that would be on a piece of paper and pencil, but in this case, it's in Clip Studio. Okay, yep, so we're getting just about to the point where we're going to go ahead and put a little shading on these skulls that are holding up his cape. I went ahead and added a little bit of red showing on the bottom of his uniform, and again give those a quick shading and color. Still checking out, see again I still got a little shading I think I added in when I was on the ink layer, but again, like I said, I think I said before that, theoretically, if you were done with the drawing, you would flatten all that out so it wouldn't matter in the first place. But I'm adding a little bit of blue shading to the skulls on his cape. I'll also go in there here in a minute and take one of my ink brushes to add some ink lines to the bottom. And we're getting really close to being done with this. I probably got a few more ink lines to lay down and fill in again just whatever gaps I'm noticing here toward the end. After that, all I'll have to do is fill in the background, which I'm pretty much have kind of decided beforehand. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay in a black color in the background and then take the airbrush, kind of reflecting the green from his eyes, and give him kind of an ethereal glow around him in contrast to the black, and I think that'll look pretty good. But right now I'm just adding in any other additional lines I want to add in. Some freehanded, some using one of my brush tools to add it in. Again, kind of experiment and see which ones I like, which ones, if I don't like it, I undo it until I come across one I like. A lot of that's kind of trial and error, see what works. And of course, a lot of it also has to do with how much pressure you put on the pen when you're using your pen. The more pressure you get, the bigger the lines get. But just filling in, seeing what I like. Taking advantage of some of my pens and what they'll do. So that looks pretty good. Like I said, get to the point here where all I'll end up doing is filling in the black around where he's at. Of course, I'll need to fill in some of the gaps with that. But then take some of the green from his eyes and use the airbrush to get a, like I said, that kind of ethereal green glow around him. Kind of spooky looking effect. That's what I'm doing there. Just filling that in wherever I think it looks good. You know, a little kind of smoky look to it. And with a little bit of cleanup, we're just about done with Todd McFarlane's Spawn, at least our version of it. Like I said, next time when we get together, I'm going to show you how to take some of these drawings that I've done and convert them into faux comic book covers, which, like I said, was a pretty quick deal and was actually quite fun to do. Like I said, using Photoshop and Clip Art Studio. But we're pretty much done with Spawn here. So we'll catch you next time on Artist Corner. I'm Martin Sexton, and look forward to seeing you again on the next lesson. And